Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Ramirez, and I'm one of the editors of the Corpus Christi Caller-Times in South Texas. We're part of the USA Today network, which is hosting this panel discussion that looks at New Mexico, Texas, and key states around the country in the coming weeks and how they're going to move forward following an executive order issued by President Joe Biden. This panel was put together to better understand the impacts of that moratorium that was put in place on leases on federal land for oil and gas operations. We will discuss its direct implications on the economy, industry, and workforce. Thanks for joining us. As I mentioned, I'm one of the editors of the Caller-Times, but I've also covered energy for the USA Today network for a number of years. And in that time, I, like all of you, have seen evolution in the oil fields. Communities suffer and prosper by the trends that the industry sets. We have joining us today leaders from Texas and New Mexico who are going to talk about the potential economic impacts of the latest industry development and the impact to workforce and regulatory agencies. Joining me today are Christi Craddick. She's the chair of the Texas Railroad Commission. She's also a native of Midland, Texas, which is in the heart of the Permian Basin. Adrienne Sandoval, who is the Oil Conservation Division Director of New Mexico's Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department. Also joining me is Representative Jim Townsend, the minority leader of New Mexico's House of Representatives. He's currently serving as a member and minority leader of the New Mexico House of Representatives, where he represents the 54th District. Jason Modglin is the president of the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. And Claire Chase is the Director of Government Affairs at MAC Energy Corporation, which is based in Artesia, New Mexico. Thanks for joining us today. This is a topic that's timely, so let's just dive right in. An executive order by President Joe Biden, as I mentioned, on January 27th, is calling for a pause on new oil and gas leases on federal lands that applies to offshore and onshore. The administration said it was going to review a review by the Interior Department would allow for the examination of the, quote, climate costs of production, but would also allow for the federal government to examine benefits of increasing royalties and ensure against the possible subsidizing of the fuel industry, fossil fuel industry. Let me start with a couple of quick questions. We can dive right into this. Let's start with the kind of message that this executive order sends to the oil and gas industry. Commissioner Craddick, I'd like to start with you. Do you think that this is a warning from an administration and a president who early on signaled that he would support a ban on fracking, and whose agenda has kind of leaned toward directing new attention to renewable energy?
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks for having me today. Unfortunately, I think that this administration doesn't understand how important the oil and gas industry is, not just to Texas and New Mexico, but really across the country. And I say that when you look at the Great Recession we came out of in 2010, the oil and gas industry really was the job creator. Now we're in COVID and hopefully coming out of COVID. Sometime soon, if we can get some vaccinations into people and get back to whatever the new normal is for the world. And you've lost a lot of jobs, not just in this industry, but across the country. And I think that you've got an oil and gas industry as an opportunity to, again, create jobs and create good paying jobs, by the way. But also, I think you're looking at, generally, if you overregulate any industry, which is where I think this administration's going, that causes job loss and causes more cost to doing business. So I think looking at overregulation is going to be a real challenge for us. I think the bottom line is this administration is indicated they're not going to be friendly to oil and gas and to coal and to fossil fuels. And I think that's a short-sighted perception about how to do business, not just in the state, but where we are across the country and across the world. If you look at where we've been across the world in the last few years, for the United States, we've become a net energy exporter, particularly natural gas and oil across the world, and companies across the country and across the world want to do business much more so with the United States. In December, we did not import Saudi Arabia oil for the first time, maybe in a lifetime. And I say that in a generation. So I think we're losing those opportunities as this administration tries to shut down a very vibrant, important industry to this country.
Yes, that's a really stark prediction and projection. Federal lands and water account for nearly a quarter of oil production in the United States and about 12% of gas production. That's back in 2019, according to the Energy Information Agency. And even so, some states could potentially be disproportionately impacted. I was kind of learning about how in New Mexico, production on oil on federal land accounts for nearly 50% of the current production there. Adrienne, I'd like to hear from you on how you think your thoughts on how New Mexico is going to approach to this moratorium and its impacts in the future, now and into the next couple of years.
Yeah, thank you. So actually, New Mexico's production last year was 62% of it was on federal land for oil and 64% of it was for gas, while 55% of our wells are on federal land. So we even have more than over 50% of our production and our wells on federal land. There are two facets to what's happening right now. We have the secretarial order that came out from the Department of Interior a couple weeks ago at this point, and then the executive order that came out as well. In New Mexico, we are proud to be an all of the above energy state. We recognize the need to address climate change and take strong actions on the federal level in order to do that. But at the same time, here in New Mexico, we have been taking, a pretty strong stance under the leadership of our governor to combat climate change and make those changes over the past couple years in order to be preventative and take those steps early on. And so, we have spoken with the Biden administration and we hope to be invited to the table in order to discuss, these options as they analyze the permits and the permitting process and leasing process. We believe we have a lot of really valuable information that we've gathered over the last couple years as we've moved on this path to combat climate change. Again, being a very heavy oil and gas state, we have, I think, a lot of lessons learned and a lot of really valuable information that we can share. And so we very much recognize the need for the federal government to take these actions on climate change. But we are a unique state, and we could, I think, have some longer term impacts. We're not expecting anything on the short term, though.
That's good news to hear. I imagine that's very welcome for people in production out there and whose livelihoods are in the balance here. I was doing some research recently that said that about 26 million federal acres were under lease to oil and gas developers. That was at the end of 2018, which was the most updated figure I could find that was provided by the Bureau of Land Management. Things probably could have changed, which means it probably would have, there probably is even more. And about half of that, near half of that acreage are producing oil and gas as in economic quantities. Jason, I'd like to hear from you as to, as Texas's production is largely on private land. What are the impacts there for the future?
Well, you're absolutely right. Texas is largely privately owned, 95% privately owned in the state. Onshore impact will likely be minimal. But we see a lot of opportunities in federal land. Certainly, federal lands has been leased here in Texas here recently, and we anticipate operators will pull back development plans on federal lands across the country and return to more of a Texas-centric operations. But the real story is in offshore. Offshore employs 120,000 jobs, according to the American Petroleum Institute, just benefiting Texas. These jobs are in jeopardy if those moratoriums stay in place for long periods of time. And we reported at the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers that Texas upstream oil and gas suffered a 30% decline in 2020. Nearly 60,000 direct upstream jobs in oil and gas were lost. And the rig count declined by more than 60% as well. And so really those impacts are what we're talking about. What comes next from this administration? Our operators are committed to working with the administration to invest in the United States, to employ Americans, and provide abundant, affordable, and reliable energy. But we'll absolutely steadfastly oppose litmus tests that call for the end of domestic oil and gas production. It's that cost on consumers and manufacturers that will force us into an increase in imported crude, imported wind and solar components from countries with lower environmental and labor standards. And that's completely contrary to the president's goals.
This notion of getting to the table and having that conversation with the administration is kind of key. I saw that in Texas, at least four members of Congress, all Democrats, have urged Biden and the administration to reconsider the moratorium. Representative Townsend, I'd like to bring you into this conversation about, what does this say about support? What does that say? That inclination of members going to the Biden administration directly to urge a reconsideration is, what do you think that says about the support of the impact on this industry, both in Congress and in state legislatures? Representative Townsend, still got you there? We may have lost him for a moment, but we can move on, and maybe we can reestablish connections with him in a few moments. But in the meantime, I can reach out to Claire for a moment. Now, to be clear, the moratorium doesn't impact existing leases and operations on federal lands, as far as I've been made aware. Claire, Mac Energy is one of those companies that has a long established footprint in production. How long can production, be sustainable? How long can it be sustained if, in fact, this is an indefinite timeline? We've heard somewhere in the neighborhood of this being a 60-day moratorium, but the fear is that it could be indefinite. What do you think are the implications, or how long do you think the production could be sustained if this goes on for a long period?
Well, I think that we have to, right now, what we're estimating is about an 80% decline in 5 years. So, right now, a lot of companies rush to get their applications for permits to drill done prior to the transition of administrations. And so, most of us probably have 2 years of permits that have been approved, and we'll be able to drill those. But 5 years from now, we're going to see an 80% decline in production on federal lands, which is a huge blow to the state of New Mexico, which, as Adrienne Sandoval mentioned, 62% of our production is on federal land. That's true for our company as well. If we're not able to drill here, then, we're going to have to figure out where to go. Texas is obviously looking like a really great option. And that's a double hit to the state of New Mexico. Not only are they losing the revenues from oil and gas, but then they're losing the tax revenue from companies like ours. We obviously pay a lot of taxes ourselves, plus all of our employees. So if we're picking up and moving, New Mexico is just going to be hit extra hard, because companies are going to look at that above ground risk and say, New Mexico doesn't look like a great place to invest. We're going to have to look elsewhere.
Understood. And then, and I'd like to talk with you for a moment, Commissioner Craddick, just for a moment. You are on the Railroad Commission, which is kind of a misnomer. It's not it doesn't regulate only railroads. It is the regulator of energy in the state of Texas. How does your agency adapt under this executive order? Have there been any changes or in the conversation about oil and gas regulations in Texas, or are you still kind of examining the impacts here?
Well, Chris, we are, to clarify for those of you who don't know what the Railroad Commission does, you're right, we actually don't do railroads anymore. So we're the oil and gas pipeline, coal mine, gas utility regulator. We also have carbon capture in this state, and geothermal, which people don't realize. And so we are we have been and continue to be the energy regulator. And so I think that the biggest challenge for us really is to have regulatory certainty, and that's where we're concerned that we're beginning to see some of that again coming out of DC. So where we have a comparison, I've been at this agency long enough to remember the Obama administration. When they walked out the door as an agency, we were watching 144 rules and regulations they had proposed or put in place that had to do with what we regulate as well. And so we anticipate that those rules and regulations, a lot of those will come back in some form or fashion. That means a lot more conversation about how we make sure our rules are up to date and best practices first and foremost, but make sure that we're having conversations if they'll talk to us from the Biden administration. I think that's been the concern that a lot of us have. We walked out the door of this last administration, and they at least were calling us, asking us questions and having good conversation and understood oil and gas. So I think that's our biggest concern first and foremost to date. But I want to mention something that Claire said. We're, by the way, glad to have you from New Mexico anytime. We love to have jobs and job creation, but I always remind people that you can produce all you want, but if you can't get it to market, then that becomes a real problem too. So as you look not just at what's coming down from Bureau of Land Management, potentially from EPA, but also from FERC and pipeline regulations, if you can't build new pipeline or don't have pipeline available to move product, for Texas, we do a lot of, move a lot of our product offshore through our ports. If we're not able to continue developing our ports, we've got dredging projects going on both with the Port of Corpus Christi, and we've just been approved the Port of Houston to do dredging project as well. If we can't get our product to market worldwide, then that really puts the whole area at a disadvantage. So I think not only are we looking at just the executive orders today, but the potential rules and regulations that we anticipate will come. And that's unfortunate that there's not more vibrant conversation with this administration and the states about what we do well and where some opportunities are for them to work with us instead of over-regulate us or tell us all what to do. So I agree with New Mexico. I think we're doing a lot of good things out of the states. Texas is working along with our sister agency, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. They do the air emissions piece. We do the oil and gas part on what best practices are across the state on a lot of issues. But being told what to do on a federal, I would tell you New Mexico is different than Texas, even though we have some of the same rocks. And so how we do things and how we do business is different. I think one size doesn't fit all coming from the federal administration. And that's going to be a real concern for all of us going forward, I think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Definitely something, food for thought there. I see we have Representative Townsend. Are you back with us, sir?
I'm trying to, unfortunately, our backbone resembles our regulatory framework. Sometimes it doesn't work all the time.
Well, I tell you what, I'm going to give you another bite at this apple before maybe some kind of issue with the connection goes away. But let me just repeat a question I had to you earlier. Several Congress members of Congress, all Democrats, have urged Biden to reconsider the moratorium in its essence. Representative Townsend, I'd like to find out from you your thoughts on, what is that show of solidarity or that effort to try to get the Biden administration to the table to talk about the executive order that he issued. What do you think that illustrates or says about the support of the impact on the industry, both in Congress and in legislatures? I think we may still be having a connection problem with him. We'll see if we could try to get him away. We'll see if we could try to get him back. But in the meantime, we can continue. We just heard a few moments ago. Some of the themes here have been focusing on trying to make that conversation with the administration to illustrate to the administration that, hey, look, this is something that's going to impact our state very heavily. And I wanted to find out from you. Let's see. I wanted to see if I could ask you, Commissioner Craddick again. You mentioned how your state is going to. How the agency is going to adapt under this. Have you had these conversations with any of the agencies at this point, or is the wound still fresh as it is?
I don't know. Look, the wound isn't still fresh. I would never call it that. I think that there are lots of opportunities. There are a lot of people going into this new administration that we've developed relationships with. Both me and this agency and other members for many years. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to communicate. We haven't had any outreach yet. They haven't come to us, and hopefully as they get their feet on the ground and realize they may have moved way to one end of their party progressively instead of just looking at what's best for the country across the board, they'll do that and talk to us in Texas, New Mexico, other states that have oil and gas production that really do have good common sense. But and we can work with them, because I think that there are lots of opportunities to do so. Like New Mexico, we have been working on our environmental issues as well, and we'll continue to do that. That is our priority as an agency. And one of the things that we're doing as an agency is upgrading IT, trying to make our data more available and be more transparent as an agency. I think everybody wants to see the information that what is really going on in an industry, whether it's on pipes or whether it's oil and gas production, and that's been a priority for us. And I know you've asked Jim this question a couple of times. I'm going to answer it from a Texas perspective. Look, energy is nonpartisan, in my opinion. It doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, however you want to label yourself. Energy is important. We use it every day. Oil and gas is important, but Texas also is the highest wind-powered state in the entire country. So we have a little bit of everything fits in Texas too. We're a high-growth state, so we need a lot of energy. And so one of the reasons we believe people come to Texas, not just because everybody wants to be in Texas, no offense to New Mexico, we like y'all too, but we have a good business relationship with people. We have low cost energy, both electricity. We have opportunities, low cost property taxes, and opportunities in Texas. And so if you start closing down coal plants, not using oil and gas in the state, that really affects not just one part of the state or the other, but it affects an entire state and the jobs that an industry creates and the jobs that move into your state. So that's not a Republican or Democrat issue. I think that's a little bit of everybody gets concerned. And what we found in Texas is that the members that signed the letter that you saw go out this past week, or others, there's a lot of job creation in their areas of the state, and they see that opportunity for communities that may have been lower income or that didn't have a lot of opportunity historically, that energy's brought those opportunities to their community, and energy is important for them going forward. So I think you can protect the environment, which again, that's our job as an agency, and I think we do a pretty good job. And you can also have production of oil and gas. I don't think that you have to choose one or the other. I think both can go hand in hand together to make you successful as a state and make the country successful.
Excellent. Now, this executive order, the move that was made by the Biden administration, was largely applauded by environmental groups nationally. Adrienne, is there a consensus about what this moratorium means for public lands, federal lands in Texas and New Mexico?
I think we're still analyzing and trying to determine what the moratorium on leasing means. Again, this is a moratorium on leasing. It is not a moratorium on new permits. There was the secretarial order, and that was only in place. That is only in place for 60 days at this point. New Mexico, as Ms. Chase mentioned, has operators have accumulated about 6,000 permits over the past couple years, sort of hedging themselves for a potential change on the federal side. And so, we're not expecting any sort of short-term impacts. We are looking potentially down the road what it may mean. But, again, also in that executive order, it talks about doing an analysis on the permitting and the leasing processes. Here in New Mexico, we have what we think is a very good relationship with the field offices and the state offices, with the Bureau of Land Management. We believe we have a lot of, really good information and sort of lessons learned to share with the federal government. And we've been, I think, very proactive to try to engage with them and share those lessons. And I think we have a really unique situation here in New Mexico, where we have a lot of federal land intermingled with the state and private lands. And so we're a very, I think, complex state, but we have taken a lot of great steps to address climate change. And again, we think we have a lot of really good information that we can share with the federal government as they move through this process.
I see we have Representative Townsend back. Can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you.
Excellent, excellent. Hey, listen, thanks for joining us. And I know we had a few connection problems there, but I would like to throw a question to you. The Biden administration has really pitched exploring the merits of green energy, renewable energy, and New Mexico's governor even has largely pushed for an investment in green or renewable energies, and making that a milestone actually in diversifying the state's economy. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, I don't believe anybody in New Mexico would discount the green energy efforts, the renewable energy efforts. But to New Mexicans, what we must always look for is affordable energy, reliable energy. And that's what New Mexicans need. That's what our businesses need. And I think we have lost sight of the fact that what we are trying to do as a legislature is build a platform for jobs to be created, sustainable jobs to be created. And today in New Mexico, we're blessed with significant resources in fossil fuels, as well as wind and solar energy. But today, I don't believe we can discount one to the other. We need to fortify the platforms of both, and certainly not at the cost of the other. So our Permian Basin resources are unique. They are abundant, and right now they are the backbone to our electrical grid, and of course to many, many jobs across New Mexico. So we won't. We think the efforts to both need to continue, but not at the cost of the New Mexico constituent.
Excellent, excellent. Well, now let me shift a little bit here toward discussion about bottom lines. In your mind, Jason, what kind of economic impact does this have on oil and gas producers at the granular level, at the ground level?
Well, thanks, Chris. And I just want to compliment both the leader, but also Chairman Craddick. Renewables are complementary to oil and gas, and we've seen the largest increases in oil and gas production here in Texas recently, breaking 1970s records, contributed more to our state tax coffers than ever before. According to the Texas Oil and Gas Association, just last year, $13.9 billion in taxes and royalties were paid into the state and local tax authorities. And that went to support public and higher education, roads and water infrastructure. And lawmakers here were also smart to utilize it for long-term funding obligations like teacher pension and disaster mitigation planning. But lawmakers have not taken steps to impose taxes on wind and solar or electric vehicles comparable to oil and gas. And this threatens to disrupt education, roads, and water infrastructure funding as we move forward if oil and gas is stymied. And that's really the bottom line for our broader economy. If we scale back and we eliminate those jobs, eliminate that investment in our communities, we'll pay for it long term with less investment into our kids, but also into water and road infrastructure.
And now, Claire, this kind of dovetails off of that conversation, that statement from Jason. Beyond the company bottom lines, whether they are turning a profit as a business themselves, how does this affect workforces in those sectors, like some of the feeder businesses, some of the smaller businesses? Are there any predictions that you may have as far as it relates to how far-reaching this will be for workers on the front line, not just the people in the offices in suits?
It's a really great point, actually. And Leader Townsend can attest to this, certainly, where our company is headquartered and where Representative Townsend lives. Artesia is roughly 15 to 20,000 people. We are already losing businesses left and right. We've had, some of our restaurants closed permanently. We've obviously lost a lot of our service companies. And the more that we continue down this path and the more that people have to relocate to find work in communities like ours that are so dependent on oil and gas, those other businesses, the barbershops, the restaurants, the hotels, even the little shopping centers on Main Street are going to start losing all of that revenue as well. And on top of this pandemic, we've been in a pretty strict lockdown for quite a while, and businesses have been struggling already. So then to have the community, the people who live there moving out of state to seek better opportunities, it's devastating. This ban will absolutely devastate New Mexico if we don't figure out how to change it.
And Representative Townsend, I mean, what, if anything, have you been hearing from your constituents? I mean, are they preparing? Are they bracing? Or are they asking you questions about what we do or how to prepare?
Absolutely. For several months now, one of the major issues in New Mexico has been the lockdown. Kids being out of the classroom. You guys in Texas have enjoyed your children being in classroom and in construction most of the time all over the state, and we haven't done that. And we have a number of people in our community and all over the state that are leaving, not only because of the lack of opportunities, not only because of the lack of consistency in the regulatory platforms, but they're leaving so that their children can have the opportunity to continue their education. Across our state right now, we have juniors and seniors who were on paths for scholastic and athletic programs. They're literally their feet have been cut off underneath them. They have nothing to stand on. They are told on one hand to believe in science, and then they talk to their cousins and their friends and all of the surrounding states, and they have become just completely disenchanted with the process in New Mexico. So they're leaving for not only opportunities, but for the quality of life issues. And parents are very, very committed to their children, as you well know, and they're going to get them back in the classroom where they can succeed and flourish.
Excellent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for taking the time out of very busy schedules that I know you all have to speak with us. This is something that we at the USA Today Network, both here in Texas and in New Mexico, find very important. And so we really appreciate your taking the time to speak with us about this. I mean, it's a very important topic. We're still very much at the beginning of it. I mean, the executive order was issued just about a week and a half ago, and we're still trying to mete out the impacts of it. And having learned minds like yours help us guide our way through the fog is very important to our readers. Listen, I want to thank you all very much for joining us. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Chris. Sorry
Thank you, Chris.
the problem.
Thanks, Chris.
Oh, hey, no problem. Thank you. It's nice meeting you, all of you.